I want to jump into the '60s and rock and roll because in the book, um, um, you wrote about the process of trading in your devotion to the Baptist religion for an obsession with rock and roll, and more specifically, groups like the Beatles and Rolling Stones influenced you. Explain how.
Well, there weren't many bands around back then, Jonathan. I know it sounds weird to say that, but we had a lot of individual stars, coming from the '50s, the Bo Diddleys and Chuck Berrys, and we had a lot of doo-wop groups, harmony groups, but there weren't that many bands, and and so I wasn't that interested in show business. I wasn't that interested in the individual so much. Although, I was buying a few singles and enjoying the records, but I never really had a connection to any of the artists until the Beatles came. And suddenly, here was a band, and they were followed by like 15 more terrific bands. We called it the British Invasion, and that communicated something different to me, and I think to all of us. 4 or 5 guys singing and playing was unusual. I mean, if you went to your high school dance, you saw an instrumental group. There was nobody singing, and basically the communication of friendship and family and community was really the communication that turned me on. And I wanted to do that as a lifestyle, more than the show business aspects of it,
Right.
But I always combined the Beatles and Stones because the Beatles were just too perfect. They were a revelation of this whole new idea of being in a band, but they were so good. We only caught them halfway through the career. They were already fantastic. And then the Rolling Stones came 4 months later, and they made it look easier than it was. And they didn't have the perfect harmony. They kind of wore what they felt like. Kind of like the first punk band. And so how I like to refer to it as the Beatles introduced a brand new world to us, and the Rolling Stones invited us in.
Oh, that's terrific. Stevie, I don't know if you heard the rustling after I asked that last question because your book fell out of my lap because I want to ask you about something that you wrote. You just talked about the Beatles and you talked about Rolling Stones, but in your book you also write about Little Richard, and you write Little Richard was the embodiment and archetype of the philosophy of rock and roll freedom. My man, his flamboyant, multisexual androgyny said, you can be whoever you want to be. He turned rock into an art form that not only tolerated reinvention, but demanded it. And here's the line that jumped out at me. He opened his mouth and out came liberation.
Yeah.
Talk more about that.
Well, all of that is true. He was the one who said, you can be anybody you want to be, and that was never attached to what would become an art form. The art form of rock, which was not going to really be realized until the mid '60s. But it began with him, saying that you not only are you free to be whoever you want to be, but this particular art form demands it, and so you got to reach inside and don't be afraid. Stop being afraid of who you are. Just come out and be whoever you are, and be proud of it. And I think he was the one that really did that because, I mean, he wasn't all the way out, but being a gay man and certainly androgynous. He had a sense of flamboyance and of fashion, and one of the greatest singers of all time. I mean, literally. I happened to catch a sound check with him once, and he just sang so amazingly. I mean, he's amazing on his hit records as well, but he's actually even more versatile than his records revealed. But anyway, he to me was the archetype of what would be rock and roll, and Chuck Berry would be the king. I mean, Chuck Berry brought the he brought the guitar and he brought the storytelling. So Chuck Berry would be the guy who started to really elevate it into an art form. But Richard just brought the primitive, primal scream, of like, I'm alive, I'm alive, and you need to pay attention to me.
Or you better pay attention to me.